a busy world in Lincoln, busy world in Washington, D.C., as we've been able to watch. So we're glad you took some time to come and visit us. So without any further ado, Governor Pete Ricketts.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Wow, what a great turnout. Thank you so much for coming out here this morning. I very much appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to come and talk about the important things that we have going on here in the state. Before we get started, we also have Tom Breezy, who is running for legislature. He is the presumptive senator from District 41 here because you're not running against anybody. True. Those are great elections and nobody's running against you. As a candidate, those are great elections. Well, folks, again, thank you very much for being here because, you know, we have the best place in the world to live right here in Nebraska. And the reason we have the best place in the world is because of Nebraskans. Nebraskans are involved in their communities, their churches, and their schools. And by being here today, you all are really demonstrating that very best spirit of Nebraska by coming out and talking about these important issues. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for taking the time to do it. As your governor, what I view our mission as at the state of Nebraska is to grow Nebraska, to create opportunity because we're doing a better job at state government of being more effective, and more efficient, and more customer focused. To help companies create those job opportunities that allow our young people to stay in our communities and to attract people from around the country to come here and make Nebraska their home. And to that end, that's what we've been focused on in the legislature and how we're running our agencies. So we're going to hit upon a few of those things. Now, as I've traveled the state, and I, again, continue to do town halls like this as often as I can to talk to folks about what are the important issues, the most important thing, or the number one thing people have talked to me about for the last 3 years or so has been property taxes. And of course, one of the things we've seen is a tremendous increase in ag land valuations that has really led to some of the increases in the property taxes that go along with that. So last year, when we set our budget, working with the legislature, we increased the property tax credit relief fund by over 45%. And that means that we will deliver in this budget, this 2-year budget cycle, $408 million in direct dollar-for-dollar property tax relief from the state to all property owners in the state. That's a big win for taxpayers, big increase. At the end of the day, the only way you can have sustainable tax relief, whether it's going to be property tax relief at the local level or when we're doing tax relief at the state level, is because we control expenses. That's the only way it happens. Now, in our budget this year, we've made great strides at the state level. Before I took office, the growth of the budget was 6.5% a year. We cut that growth nearly in half to 3.6%. And that's how we had the ability to increase that property tax credit relief fund. By controlling our expenses, that allowed more room in the budget to increase that property tax credit relief fund. I'm taking that up 45%. Anyway, so controlling that expenses is important. We've done it at the state level, and that's what those bills, LB 958 and 959, did. They had expense control parts in it. Now, those bills changed pretty dramatically through the committee process and through 3 rounds of voting. And so a lot of those expense controls were taken out. They were stripped out. The 958, as originally proposed, would have limited the growth of ag land valuations to about 3% a year on average across the state. It had some other expense controls in there, you know, just like limiting the growth of county budgets to about 3% or so. Again, what we're targeting at the state level, I think it was actually 3.5%. And then in the 959, it would have limited some of the, again, the growth in the school budgets to about 5% a year. And then also had things in it to limit how much money went to the reserves for schools to about 5% of their annual budget a year. And so those were some of the expense control items we had in there. And frankly, we had a lot of the special interests come in and say, well, we can't live with that. That's draconian. And we said, okay, we're shooting for 3% at the state, but what can you at the schools live with? Or what can you at the counties live with? They wouldn't give us a number. And that's where we really have to focus on that expense control. If we're going to have property tax relief, we have to limit that. And it's important because when we put the school aid formula in, and that's where about 60 to 75% of your property taxes go to is your school districts, is we've added a lot of money into the school system.
Hello.
But without that expense control, we don't see property tax relief.
No.
So, for example, in 1991, when the school aid formula was created,
What?
the state added in $311 million into the TIOSA formula. And local property taxes collected by schools came down $37 million. But just a couple of years later, even though that fund continued to go up 23%, schools were collecting an additional $50 million in property taxes, an all-time high for schools across the state. That's 1994. Then in 1997, the state added another $125 million, took it up 27%. And property taxes came down $700,000. So $125 million in, only $700,000 came down. And the next year, 2000, they went up another $25 million. So you can see we at the state can add more money in, but without that expense control on the other side, we don't necessarily see that property tax relief. And that's why both, when I was working with Sarah Glore and Sarah Sullivan, those were important parts of those bills. Now, like I said, a lot of that got pulled out, but we did get some some progress made. So, for example, with the Revenue Committee bill, that was LB 958, we got $20 million more dedicated to just ag land through that property tax credit relief fund. We were able to get that passed. And just to put that in perspective, the previous year, last year, there were 26 different bills that were dropped in front of the Revenue Committee on real property tax relief, and not one of them even got out of committee. Not even one of them got consensus to get onto the floor to be debated. So that $20 million that we got additional in the property tax credit relief fund just for ag land got out of that committee and got through 3 rounds of voting and to my desk for signature. So we were able to make progress on that. On the school bill, 959, we did have some expense controls in there. And another really good provision I think will help with property tax relief. So one of the things we removed in LB 959 was the minimum levy adjustment. And this is something that, you know, your school districts are limited to a $1.05 levy, okay? Well, if they fell below 95 cents, they became less eligible for that equalization money. And so we took away that provision because we thought it was a disincentive for school districts to drop their levies. You know, as valuations go up, the way you can balance that off is take your levies down and keep your revenue neutral, right? So if school districts felt like they couldn't take their levy down because they'd lose school aid money, they didn't do it. So we wanted to take away that barrier. And so that's one of the things we did get accomplished in LB 959. We also took down the amount of levy override they could do for the qualified undertaking fund. It used to be 5.2 cents, and we took that down to 3 cents. So again, some expense control there. So we did make progress on that part. The third thing I talked about in the State of the State address this year was the Transportation Innovation Act. And again, I worked with the Transportation Committee and the Appropriations Committee on that. Again, went through some iterations, didn't end up the way we started out, but we got a bill done that is going to move $50 million out of the cash reserve to invest in our road system, you know, these one-time capital expenses, and then will continue to be funded by unallocated gas taxes going forward. That's going to be something that can help us accelerate the work. And that's important because our top industries are agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. All of those require a strong transportation infrastructure to be able to expand. And this will help us spur economic growth. So this is a really good deal for Nebraska. Between the Transportation Innovation Act, which we just passed, and LB 84, which was now U.S. Senator Deb Fisher's bill when she was in the unicameral, we've got a nice stream of revenues coming in for the Department of Roads to be able to work on, to be able to complete some of these projects. Medicaid is supposed to be about protecting children, pregnant women, the disabled, elderly. And when you expand it like they did in Arkansas, you actually make it more difficult for those populations to get access to medical care. And so it's a bad deal for the current population. It also would have meant in Nebraska that we would have had to spend over almost $1 billion, actually, almost $1 billion over the course of 10 years. And that means, again, that we don't have the money to invest in things such as roads or education or tax relief, things we need to invest in to be able to expand our state, to grow our state. If you look at what we laid out in the State of the State, I laid out 4 things. We were able to accomplish all 4 of those things. So by being business friendly, we create the opportunity to create more jobs here in our state. And so that's one of the things that we want to be, is more customer focused at the state of Nebraska, be more efficient, more effective. And that helps us grow our state. We're setting goals, and when we reach those goals, we set new goals that are even higher. And that's how we continuously improve how we do our operations. So we really bring that mindset to state government, so we can always do a better job for you, our customers.
But that's just a brief overview there, and I think now we'd like to open it up to questions. And I would encourage you to ask the questions, because that's one thing I learned out campaigning, that we can go out here and talk about the issues and tell you what we think, but it's the questions that really delve into the issues and help us to explain things and help us understand what folks are thinking about. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity and ask some questions of the governor, and I'd be happy to answer any also.
So with that, let's go ahead and open it up. Yeah.
Governor,
Do you believe that this idiot that shot 49 people in Florida had the right to buy an assault rifle?
So with regard to the tragedy that happened in Orlando, I think that was a terrorist attack. I think this is the part of the strategy of ISIS, is to find lone wolves such as that team there, who self-radicalize and then go out and commit these attacks, because they know that when they do organized attacks, it's very hard to carry out, because we have very good law enforcement. That our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement work very hard to prevent those types of attacks that occurred, like in Paris, where they did have an organized attack. So I think that to strike here in America, they are looking for people like that to be able to do it. With regard to the Second Amendment rights, are there things that we can look at? Well, we can't deprive anybody their constitutional rights without due process. And while there may be things we can do that involve due process, our Second Amendment rights are fundamental to our freedoms here in our country. That's why our founding fathers put it in the Constitution. And it's not about hunting, and it's not about self-defense, though the Second Amendment does help us with both those things. It really is about the fundamental belief that our founders had, that our rights come from God to us, not to the government. And that if we don't have a way to protect our rights, and that's what the Second Amendment is about, protecting our rights and being able to defend those rights from the government, then we've given up our rights. And so I am a strong believer in our Second Amendment rights, and am very leery of anybody who wants to restrict those controls. So again, if you've got a terrorist who's intent upon harming us, they're going to find ways to harm us. And that's why we have to have strong law enforcement. That's why we have to have good intelligence. But that's part of what the enemy is trying to do, is harm us. We're at war with radical Islam. And if we think we're not, we're fooling ourselves, because that's exactly what's going on. There's an ideology out there that hates what we stand for, that wants to take away our freedoms and our rights. And so we're going to be in this probably for a very long time, fighting such radical extremists that we saw down in Florida. So I'm going to be very, very leery about any sort of attempt to try and restrict our Second Amendment rights. From our standpoint in state government, is about clearing out some of the clutter that gets in the way of entrepreneurs from creating jobs. Because big companies have a good time, I shouldn't say a good time, but have an easier time complying with regulation, because they can hire more people to address the regulation. Smaller companies have a harder time doing that. So we need to get rid of that regulatory clutter that's in the way. And it's, again, one of the things I've challenged all my agencies to do, is look at what's the useless complexity that you're putting up in front of people that we don't need. We're putting up barriers that don't need to be there. And so if we can remove those things, that allows entrepreneurs to go ahead and get started and get working on it. One of the things we did, for example, we passed bills for Uber and Lyft to be able to allow them to operate here in Nebraska. Again, if you're an Uber driver, you can make money, right? So you're an entrepreneur. So we want to help get those barriers out of the way. So there's a lot of things that we're going to have to do, and specifically right now, I've tasked Courtney Dentlinger, who is, from this part of the state. She was the Economic Development Director in Norfolk. She is, part of her task is assigned is how do we create the opportunities to get people to move back? How do we work with the University of Nebraska, for example, to make sure that we have those opportunities and make those connections to get people to come back? So that's the area I've assigned the responsibility to, and we're going to work with a variety of people, including the University of Nebraska, on how we put together those plans that we can grow not just Lincoln and Omaha, but the entire state. Because we can't be a healthy state if we're just growing Omaha and Lincoln. It's got to be the entire state. And that's why I focus so much on what we're doing to grow agriculture. That's our #1 industry. We can't grow Nebraska unless we grow agriculture. And manufacturing. That's our second biggest industry. Tourism's #3. So the things we do to grow those top industries are the things that will help us benefit the entire state. All those 3 things benefit the entire state. Well, again, thank you very much, everybody, for coming out here this morning. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm so grateful we had such a great turnout here today. And again, for some of the folks we talked to, there's Eric right there to get your contact information to him. And again, we're going to be looking at what we can do with regard to tax relief again. We're going to continue to focus on controlling the budget, and we're looking for your good ideas on how we can accomplish that. So thank you all very much, and have a great day.